It was in the 50s. Basically, I was listening to all sorts of things like, cowboy themes and what have you. I mean, I used to be a harmonica player before I took up guitar, but then all of the guitar bands that were around at the time sounded a bit like the Shadows, the Ventures, and John Barry 7. Early years of pop guitar before the term rock was really coined. My father was musical. He was able to get a tune out of lots of different instruments. He was able to play bugle and clarinet and a little bit of guitar and mouth organ. And I was basically self-taught. We all were in the family. And then my brother took up flute and became a proper sort of classically trained musician. But for me, it was always a kind of symbol of freedom. It was a kind of alternative to school. So I taught myself.
And then the invitation came in 1970 from Peter Gabriel. A very different, for those people who don't know, a very different Genesis at that time to its various incarnations later on as different members left. Did you know much about Peter Gabriel? Did you know much about the band?
No, I'd never heard them. In fact, he said, why don't you go down to your local record shop and listen to one of our tracks, which I did. And in those days, you used to sort of stand in a booth and people would, beam it across to you. And, next door would be the Four Seasons playing loud and you strained to hear it. But it sounded interesting and I ended up joining them. It was pretty weird and wonderful stuff. It was very different, as you say, to what followed after my departure. Really, it was like a kind of albums band and very experimental. Later to become really successful with hit singles, but it was very different in the early days. It was a lot more colourful, I think.
And the lineup was interesting because just about everybody in the band had very different backgrounds, coming to Genesis from a different angle. I mean, obviously, Peter Gabriel, such a fantastic performer and performance artist. Phil Collins had been a child actor, public school boys in the band, people from all sorts of walks of life. Was that one of the reasons why it was so successful in the early days?
It's difficult to know why it was that successful. I think that luck plays a certain amount of, you've got to have luck on your side. But it was just a very hard-working band. We did a lot of touring and, we travelled to a lot of countries. And maybe it's probably because people were very interested in music and different kinds of music in the band. So you had the mixture of, you had a certain amount of blues, you had the influence of big band, church music, classical music. And so, you kind of got this hybrid, this very eccentric sounding band, very English sounding. And eventually the Americans took to us and adopted us as a pet favourite English band, as we had album titles like Selling England by the Pound. So we represented all things UK to them, really.
You were one of the first members to decide, to perhaps leave the band and move into a different direction. Do you still have fond memories of the Genesis days? There's no other reason for the split. Obviously, it was quite amicable, wasn't it?
It was amicable, yeah. I mean, basically, we had a lot of guys in the band, all of whom were writing. So we had more than we could contain in one band. First, Peter Gabriel left. Then I left a couple of years later, and I'd already done a solo album on my own and had the odd hit on my own. So we were kind of set up, really, and the band really went from a 5-piece to a 4-piece to a 3-piece, and currently a no-piece, of course.
Was it more fulfilling, perhaps as a solo artist, even though you'd had considerable success with Genesis? You had more sort of say in your own destiny musically, didn't you? Was that the real thing about doing the solo stuff that really pushed you on into totally new directions?
It was. I mean, if you imagine that if you've got an artist trying to paint a landscape and there are 5 hands with different paintbrushes, you can imagine that there's a certain amount of compromise that goes with even the best or the most successful bands. And I really did enjoy the process of not having to audition every single idea and every single chord shape and potential lyric to someone else. So I think people outgrow bands and they can outlive their function, perhaps. And I think, Genesis, more than most bands, has shown that it can spawn a number of separate careers and people that can actually maintain that without disappearing off into total obscurity.
Most guitarists will have a favourite guitar. Most guitarists may even have a collection of guitars. Do you have a particular favourite? Do you have a collection of your own?
Well, I do have a collection, yeah. I've probably got about 15 guitars at home. I worked with Steve Howe for some years. We had a band together, and he had about 150. I mean, he had a museum's worth, and I've got a mere 15 up in the attic. But my favourite, really, and the one that I used to drool over when I looked in shop windows, was the Les Paul. So I've got a gold top Les Paul 1957 original, but it's the equivalent of a Stradivarius violin, or the Maserati that you happen to have tucked away in your garage.
Thanks again for taking a look at one of the interviews on this channel. If you enjoyed it, click on the like button. Make sure you ring that notification bell to be informed of any future videos. And if you possibly can, subscribe to the channel because there are many more interviews here to explore.